Welcome to Learn at Home with WVIA. My name is Michael Soskel, and I am an elementary science teacher at the Wallenpaupack Area School District. Thank you for joining me to play the 5-Clue Challenge. Even though we have to stay home right now, it doesn't mean that we can't travel the world to learn about incredible places, amazing animals, new cultures, and interesting people. Each time we are together, I am going to take you on a virtual field trip to a new place so that we can learn together from the people who live there. But before we travel, you will have to guess where we're going. I'll give you 5 clues, and we'll see how quickly you can figure it out. Are you ready to explore with me? Do you want to know where we're going today? Let's play.
I am really excited to take you somewhere special today. But before we go, you are going to have to guess where we're going. So I'm going to give you 5 clues. After each clue, I'm going to give you a little information and give you some time to write down a guess. So if you've got a pad and a pencil or a pen, now would be the time to get it out and get ready. As I'm giving you a little bit of information after each clue, take your best guess, and we'll see how quickly you can figure out what country we are going to today. So your first clue is that the country that we're traveling to borders the Pacific Ocean. So the Pacific Ocean is the biggest ocean in the world. But what's really amazing is that all around the Pacific Ocean, there's a ring of fire. That's what it's called anyway. It's an area where there's lots of volcanoes and earthquakes because there are different plates on the Earth's surface that are moving together. And sometimes two will go next to each other and they'll catch. Pieces of the Earth's crust will catch, and tension will build up and then it'll slip, and that'll make an earthquake. At other times, there are 2 big plates on top of the Earth where one is going underneath the other. That's called a subduction zone. And what happens is the friction between those 2 giant plates heats up the Earth and creates magma, and often creates both volcanoes and earthquakes, and sometimes even tidal waves if the earthquake happens under the ocean. So the place that we're traveling to is part of the Ring of Fire. Your second clue is that the country that we're visiting today is on the continent of South America. Now, South America is dominated by 2 geographic features. The first is the Amazon River, which is the second longest river in the world. The Amazon River basin has some of the world's most amazing rainforests, with incredible plants and animals. The second geographic feature, which dominates South America, are the Andes Mountains. They're some of the world's tallest mountains, and they run along the coast, all the way from the equator down to the bottom tip of South America. Can you think of some countries in South America that we might be visiting? Go ahead and write down your guess. Your third clue is that the country that we're traveling to today has incredible biodiversity. In fact, this country has the most biodiversity per square kilometer of anywhere in the world. So what does that word mean? Do you know? Biodiversity? Biodiversity refers to the number of species of plants and animals in any given area. So if a place, like our country, has great biodiversity, it means that there's lots of different kinds of plants and animals there. Can you think of a country that fits that description? Write down your guess. Your fourth clue is that the country we're traveling to is a Spanish-speaking country. In South America, most countries are Spanish-speaking. The people in those countries speak Spanish. The one large exception, is Brazil. In Brazil, most people speak Portuguese, but we're looking for a country where people speak Spanish. It's time for your last clue. Let's see if you can get it. Your fifth and final clue is that the country that we're traveling to today sits on the equator. That means that the equator runs through this country. In parts of the country, you could be standing in the northern hemisphere, and in other parts of the country, you could be standing in the southern hemisphere. Can you think of any countries in South America where people speak Spanish and there's lots of biodiversity, where the equator runs right through that country? Write down your guess. Today, we're going to be traveling to the country of Ecuador. In fact, our virtual field trip is going to be going to a special place in Ecuador. We're going to be going to the Galapagos Islands. The Galapagos Islands are an archipelago about 1,000 miles into the Pacific Ocean. Because they're so remote, many of the species of animals and plants that have evolved there can't be found anywhere else on Earth. They're specially adapted to their environment on those islands. We're going to be meeting two of my friends who recently traveled to the Galapagos, who are going to be sharing some of their experiences with us. Beth and Curtis from Go-To Science are explorers. Beth used to be a kindergarten teacher, and now she travels around the world with Curtis, who is a paleontologist, to share science with children around the world.
Beth and Curtis, thanks for joining us today.
Hey,
Thanks
good to
for
see
having
you.
us.
Yeah.
So we just learned about the Galapagos Islands, and we would love for you to tell us a little bit about what is it like to visit there?
Ah.
Oh, wow. It's amazing to visit the Galapagos Islands. There's so many different animals and plants to see.
Yeah.
I can't wait to go back.
Yeah. For me, when I flew in there and got in there, I thought, oh, it's just an island, a rocky, arid island. And I thought, man, it's nondescript really. And then I started walking around and got into the water, and there's all these sea turtles right there. There's marine iguanas over here. And I started to realize this is a very special place. And they're not running from me. They're not like a wild animal you might see somewhere else. They're just habituated to me. They're just like, well, yeah, I see you, big deal. You know, sea lions on park benches. It's just a very interesting place.
Oh,
Unique.
One of my favorite sea lion stories was in the little village. There was a public restroom, and so I went into the public restroom, and I went to the central toilet paper dispenser because you have to take what you need before you go into the stall.
Yeah.
But there was a problem because the sea lion was laying right below the toilet paper dispenser, and I thought, well, I guess you're using this now. And I just said, I'll go another time, but there everywhere, and they clearly feel quite comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So other than sea lions that stole your toilet paper, what were some of your other favorite animals that you saw while you were there?
Oh, wow. Well, Curtis already mentioned sea turtles, and
Yeah.
I have to agree. We were able to snorkel near a really cool formation called Kicker Rock,
Mm.
and to have sea turtles just come gliding right by was unbelievable. And to realize, it's one thing to see the picture of a sea turtle, but it's another thing to have one come past you and realize that it's as big as you are. It's unreal.
Now, I know that people from all over the world travel to the Galapagos Islands because it's special because of some of the unique animals and plants that you can find there.
Oh,
Can
yeah.
you talk about maybe what makes those animals so unique?
Well, one of the big things that make those animals so unique is their geographic location. They're a long ways offshore. They're on islands, and so there's very little things coming in and out. They can't really leave the island. Most of them cannot. Some of the birds can, but so they're evolving in place, and what's going on there. So that makes it very unique. And plus, human habitation hasn't been that recent. It's very limited for the most of the islands. So
Yeah, most of the islands are still quite wild, and some of the animals many of the animals that we saw there are endemic. You can't see them anywhere else.
Yeah.
Including the Galapagos tortoise,
Yeah.
which gives the island chain its name.
Yeah, it does. And so those islands, I think the oldest island is around 2.5 to 2.7 million years, and the youngest one is less than a million years, about 700,000. So they're volcanic, and they've been coming up from the sea floor. So they've never been attached to a continent. So the animals that are there get there either by flying, by the ocean, like the marine iguana is thought that it rafted across from South America a long time ago, and it's unlike any other lizard in the world now. It can live in a marine environment or make do feeding in the ocean, which really has some unique adaptations to do that.
So because those animals have been isolated and over generations have adapted to meet their environment so that they can live better, they have these unique features that make them perfect for the Galapagos.
So the tortoises, the
The
Galapagos
Galapagos
tortoises,
tortoise, which is a land dweller.
Yeah. And so its adaptations for living on the island, or maybe found in its shell, is probably a pretty good one, but it's not as adapted to its environment, so to speak, as some of the other ones. But there are some adaptations there for its ability to live in arid areas, which is not unusual. There are many tortoises in the world that can live in arid areas. The shell features, some of the shell features, particularly the bridge over its neck, they call them saddle shells. Some of the turtles there have that for being able to reach up high to get food, particularly the fruits off cactus. That's an interesting adaptation because all the islands there are arid. And so, which is kind of surprising to people. I think they think they're going to be this lush environment, and it's not. It's an arid environment.
And we know that some of the animals that have adapted with some features that are physical, that are on their bodies or different parts of their bodies, the shape of their body has adapted. But also other animals have behavioral adaptations. And I know that you shared with me a video of, it looks like a lizard or an iguana sneezing.
That's an
So
iguana,
can you tell me a little bit about that? Because that's a really cool video.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's a really cool example because that lizard is thought to have come from the mainland, or it's the continent of South America. And so when it arrived at the island, it had a lot of adaptations it had to undergo to be able to survive in the form it is now. So everything from long claws to being able to hold on to that lava rock while it's underwater. One, even getting into the ocean was quite the feat. It's actually quite amazing because it's the only lizard that does that. And so it's evolved a face that's flat on the front. It doesn't have a pointed nose like many lizards do. It's a blunt. That's what I call it.
Blunt. Yeah.
Blunt snout.
Blunt
And
snout.
sharp teeth. And so that's for picking up the algae. So this is something that's eating algae off the rocks, which is just unheard of for lizards and in a marine environment. So one, it's got to figure out how it's going to stay down underwater and hold itself there while the waves and tides are pushing it around. Those long claws are perfect for that, so it can eat that algae. And then it's going to consume a lot of salt water while it's doing that. And that's a huge problem for almost all terrestrial animals. That's a huge problem. It deals with that in the video that we showed you, where it is actually expelling salt from its nose. And it's got special organs in its nose that collects the salt out of its blood and expels it by sneezing. So that big white thing you saw is just a big snot glob, or a salt snot glob.
Yes, salty snot.
Salty snot, yeah. And they shoot that for quite a ways. It's quite funny to watch them do it.
Yeah, the first time we saw it, I was like, wait, what is that? So I was really glad that we were finally able to capture it on film, and we've given you a slowed down sort of instant replay because it goes really fast, and you hear this as you're walking around, and it's the snot sneezes.
Yeah, and then also the coloration of them are darker because they have to warm back up because the water off the Galapagos is chilly.
Yeah.
The Conroe Current is very cold, and so when they're in the ocean, they can only stay in for a little while because they're a reptile. They're a lizard, well, which is a reptile, but all lizards are reptiles. Not all reptiles are lizards. But anyway, so it's cold-blooded. It doesn't produce its own body heat, so it has to get up on the rocks and warm up. So it's quite a feat that marine iguana even exists.
And even as a warm-blooded inhabitant of the water, we did a lot of snorkeling and diving, and even as a warm-blooded creature, I had to laugh. I'm like, I am the only person I know who travels to the equator and is hypothermic. It took me a very long time to warm up after spending time in the quite cold water. It's like, all the sweatshirts, it was really funny.
Yeah.
Not expected.
So
yeah, and we have some videos of you snorkeling underwater that we're going to share.
That water is cold like that. The Conroe Current comes through there, and if it didn't come through there, there would be no penguins there. They couldn't survive.
Yeah, so tell us about penguins. That is not something that I would expect. When I think of penguins, I normally think of the South Pole, right? You think of Antarctica and the emperor penguins that live in the ice and through the dark winters.
Yeah.
But actually, up near the equator, there's penguins on the Galapagos Islands. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the Galapagos penguins are the northernmost penguins in the world. So, and they survive as a stable population, semi-stable population on the equator. And they rely on that current to cool them down. So they'll actually go into that cold water current to cool down, to feed, to eat. It brings them food that they need, but also really importantly to keep them cooler.
And they have some interesting nesting habits too, don't they?
Yeah, they nest in the holes in the lava and in the rocks, and they breed pretty much year round, but they lay eggs 2 to 3 times a year.
And so they're not concerned with keeping those eggs warm enough, as opposed to, you think of, the penguins tucking the eggs up on their feet to keep them off the ice. This is a completely different situation.
That's right.
That would be one of the behavioral adaptations, is that they don't have to do the things that the penguins in Antarctica do. What other adaptations have those penguins made over generations or had happen over generations that allowed them to survive near the equator?
Ooh, that's a good question. Part of that is, again, feeding in that current, being able to stay in that current of water and follow that current of water in the food. Their body fat tends to be lower than other penguins as well, because it's hot out in the sun. There's a direct sunlight there. So.
Well, I'm thinking of the sea lions again and the behavior. And tell me, would you consider this a behavioral adaptation? that the sea lions, when they come out onto the beach, they'll actually raise a flipper to expose their blood vessels and warm up more quickly.
Yeah, that's something to share with other ones as well, though. But that is one there that, yeah, that is an adaptation of sea lions in general, not just the Galapagos sea lion.
This is why I have my science expert here.
It's always good to have a scientist around with you when you're exploring, right?
Yes.
It always saddens me to hear you say that.
So for our guests that are listening and might be interested to one day travel to the Galapagos Islands, can you talk a little bit, like, how did you get there? How long did it take? Did you travel by plane or boat, or were you able to walk there or take a train?
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, our regular headquarters is in Maine in the United States. And so we traveled to Florida by airplane, and then we took another plane to Ecuador. And then we had to spend the night, and we got up early the next morning and took a third flight to the island of San Cristobal, which is part of the Galapagos archipelago. And the whole trip took, it's quicker than some trips that we've been on with Go To Science. Holy cow.
12 hours probably.
Yeah. Yep. And one thing that was interesting is how careful they were when we arrived and departed from the island. Arriving, they asked everyone to cover their eyes and their faces, and they fumigated the plane cabin and all of your luggage. So you didn't bring invasive species or pests with you. And leaving, they checked your suitcase for, do you have any seeds? Do you have any rocks? They didn't want you to take any parts of the island or natural objects away from the island. So I was really impressed with how thorough they were and how much they were working to protect that really special ecosystem.
Yeah, maybe Curtis, can you talk a little bit about what an invasive species is and why it's so important not to have them spread to different areas?
Yeah, well, invasive species are usually brought in by humans, and they're a species that doesn't exist currently or naturally in that given area. And I don't mean it exists in a cage, I mean outside, out in nature. And the problem with invasive species is that the native species, which are the ones who are there, have been there for a long period of time, may not be able to deal with the invasive species behavior, whether it be predatory or some exploiting food sources that the native species relies on. So it can be very detrimental to native species in a particular area. And so that is especially true in the Galapagos Islands.
Yeah, and I know just in my area of Pennsylvania, I have a lot of ash trees, which are used for making baseball bats. And a lot of my ash trees are dying because of an invasive species that is native to Asia, that is infesting the trees and killing them. So invasive species are a problem everywhere, not just on the Galapagos.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And most of them are spread by people. The vast majority of them are spread by people. And it's not just insects or vertebrates or mammals or whatever. It's bacteria, it's fungus, it's all kinds of
plants.
things.
You think of the milfoil plant in Maine. That is a problem. It changes the ecosystems of the lakes and streams. And so they have to be very careful when you put your boat in and out of the water to make sure you're not carrying that plant with you.
Right, and I think that that particular invasive species came from fish tanks, right? So when you dump your fish tank, you shouldn't do it in a local creek, because some of the species that are living in your fish tank and then start to populate that creek in ways that are not good for the ecosystem. So we don't have a whole lot of time left, but what I want you to kind of share with our guests is, if they're in their backyard here in Pennsylvania and they see different plants and animals, how can they look for adaptations that those plants and animals have for the environment here in Pennsylvania?
Something, when you talk about the Galapagos Islands, it seems like we're remiss if we don't mention Charles Darwin. And he went to the Galapagos Islands and made observations. And one of the things that's interesting to me is that as he was making the observations, he didn't realize how earth-shattering and important and revolutionary some of these observations were. So I think one of the very best things you can do in your own backyard is to become a skilled observer and to notice all the details, and then take some time to reflect on those. You might be surprised at what sort of connections you can start to draw.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just with the birds, you can look at if you have a bird feeder or just watching birds around your yard, where do they go and what do they eat? And then what do they look like? What's their bill shape? What's their shape? What's their wing shape? Was it long and thin, or is it short and wide? And look at those things and try to even do a Venn diagram potentially of that, and try to figure out and you'll maybe see niche partitioning, depending on who you happens. But yeah, so
Yeah.
that could be a possibility.
So I think one of the common misperceptions about adaptations and evolution is that an animal will change during its lifetime.
Yeah, well, the animal doesn't think that I need to have something and it evolves that. That's not how it works at all. It's in response to a selective pressure of some type, the vast majority of them. There are mutations that can occur, but most things occur not just because of a spontaneous mutation, but some sort of selective pressure in the environment or from the female or male within that species selecting for a certain trait to reproduce. So it's inheritable. So it's a trait that's inheritable. So if you get really strong and big, really muscular, and you have a child, that child's not going to be strong and big. That's not an inheritable trait. That is something you've done over your lifetime. And so for horses, you're talking about losing toes in response to expanding grasslands over millions of years. And you can follow it quite literally, follow it as a reduction of toes as you go along. And you can follow the grassland expanse. It's very interesting. And changes in the teeth, shape of the skull, shape of the jaw. It's very compelling.
But millions of years, you're not even talking like great-grandparents to babies.
No,
you're talking much, much greater.
Right, but all evolution doesn't work that way either in that quick, short of time. Some things happen very quickly, particularly with viruses or bacteria. They can evolve incredibly fast, which is why when you hear this, oh, there's a new strain, well, that's evolution. It's changing. And it can happen very quickly because their generations are so quick. You know?
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And so it seems like the more complex the animal, the longer evolution takes.
It can be, yeah. You know, and things have, something will be selected for, and then it won't be, and then it will no longer be around. It'll die out. And so you see things that start and then they don't go anywhere. They don't last. I shouldn't say they don't go anywhere. They don't last because you look around. That's one of the things I really love. You look around, and we're all survivors. The trees, everything have made it for literally billions of years to get where you are right now. If there's a break in your chain, you wouldn't be here. Neither would that tree. Neither would any of the mosquito. It's quite an amazing thing when you think about it.
That uninterrupted chain is amazing.
So here's my last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna do this really quick because we're almost out of time. But
sure.
if you could each choose one word to describe the Galapagos Islands, what would that one word be?
All right, I'm coming. If you have one before me.
Yeah, profound. They're profound.
Profound.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say abundant. Abundant.
Excellent. So I think we gave our viewers 2 new vocab words. They can go ahead and
yes. Yay.
So thank you so much for taking us on a tour of the Galapagos today. Keep doing your awesome exploring and sharing with kids because it's really exciting. And we'll see you again soon.
All right. Thank you, Mike. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope that you enjoyed today's trip as much as I did. Traveling is one of my favorite ways to learn. Already, I can't wait for our next adventure. Thank you for joining me at Learn at Home with VIA and for sharing this experience with me. Keep exploring. I'll see you again soon.